Welcome to the Professional Muslim Women Podcast, a place for working Muslim women to share their stories, struggles, triumphs, and lessons learned along the way in pursuit of their careers. I'm Dr. Kali Hussein.
And I'm Dr. Hani Ahmed. And in this podcast, we bring inspirational, trailblazing, successful, and fulfilled professional Muslim women to you.
Get ready to be inspired and learn how you can forge your own path as well. Welcome to the Professional Muslim Women Podcast. Today, our guest is Sahra Noor. Sahra is the founder and principal at Grit Partners Consulting based in Nairobi, Kenya. She is also an executive coach, facilitator, and health strategist for nearly 20 years with progressive experience in government, academia, business, and nonprofits. Most recently, Sahra has served as an award-winning CEO of People's Center Clinics and Services, a network of integrated community clinics providing medical, dental, mental health, and social services in Minnesota. Without further ado, please welcome Sahra Noor. Welcome, Sahra.
Thank you, Kali. Thanks for having me, and congratulations on starting this podcast.
Thank you. Sahra and I go way back. We met about, almost 11 years ago now?
No, 15 years ago.
15? Oh my God. Wow. So 15 years. Wow, that's amazing. So where did this journey begin that led you to be basically a health executive in Nairobi, Kenya?
You know, for me, it started when I was in a refugee camp in Mombasa, in Kenya, in the early 90s. When my family left Somalia during the Civil War, we ended up in the Utanga refugee camp. And I was really inspired by the nurses and midwives that were really providing all healthcare in the camp. I was fortunate to be a volunteer there. I was a teenager and really saw their heroic work. And I kind of said to myself that one day if I got the opportunity to learn and go to secondary education and end up in college, that I really wanted to be either a nurse or a midwife. And that's how it started. When I got to college, I was really clear that I wanted to be a nurse. And, that's what led me to where I am today.
Oh, wonderful. So when you came here, did you start in college right away or did you start in high school?
So when I came to the United States, I started in high school. I was 18 when I came, so I had to start right away, and I was allowed to go. Sometimes you don't get that opportunity. It's if you're aging out of high school. So for 2 years, I went to high school in Virginia and got my high school diploma, and then got an opportunity to go to women's college in Minnesota. That's how I ended up there, and did my bachelor's in nursing at the St. Catherine University in Minneapolis.
And I know the story. Was transitioning from high school to college an easy feat for you, or did you have certain things that you had to deal with besides, being an immigrant?
For me, I think I got married at a young age when I was in high school in the States and had my first child. And by the time I ended up in college, my freshman year, my daughter was 16 months. It was really tough being a wife and a freshman and a mother of a toddler at such a young age. The school I went to had a lot of opportunities and support for parents who wanted to get a college degree. So I was fortunate to get some support, but a lot of sleepless nights, as you can imagine, being a young mom.
Oh, I can only imagine.
I also had my siblings and my father and my aunts and uncles were in the same city where I went to college, so that they provided the support I needed. And my child was being raised in almost a village, thankfully.
And that's such an important concept that you bring up that, I try and focus on as much as possible. A lot of the women that we meet, myself included, yes, parenthood and marriage and all those things might happen early, later, whatnot. But in order for you to accomplish, whatever goals that you set out to do, it's so important to have that network and that village, right? Family, friends, relatives.
Absolutely. And, I felt like, and you probably feel the same way, those of us who had opportunity to come with our whole family into the diaspora, into the United States, I think we were very, very fortunate. Not everybody had that opportunity to have all of their extended family and their siblings and their parents and, aunts and uncles in the same town. But I was really lucky that I had, without that, I don't think I would have been able to do what I did. both in finishing college and having the kind of career that I had and also having a family. It just would not have worked. You can't do it all. It doesn't really work like that.
Exactly. And that's the narrative that, a lot of people try and sell and say, oh, as a woman, you can do it all. You can have it all. That comes with a lot of stipulations. Yes, you can do it, but you have to have a network that supports you, right? One of the things that I usually say when people ask me, like, how do you do with 6 kids? I'm like, I probably can only do it because I'm Somali and, there's so many of us and we live so close to each other. That's probably the only reason I've been able to do it with that many kids. And I think it's very important for young women to know that, yes, you can do it, but you have to have that network, whether it's family that you have around, or is it, multiple friends? Is it multiple babysitters and daycares, or whatever support system you need to help you, do what it is you need to do? Make sure that you establish that network, and no one person can do it all themselves.
Absolutely. And what I would say, though, is beyond the stipulations, I think it also has a cost in our mental and emotional health to do it all. Because I've seen people who've done it all and they're really amazing parents and spouses and have done great work. But if you ask them, the toll that it took on their own physical, mental, emotional health, it's huge.
Yeah, you get burnt out.
Yeah. And luckily, I would say that there are times when I felt burned out completely and wanted to give up. And, we all have those moments.
Right.
But they don't last, because then you look around and everybody says, go take a nap. Let me watch your kids, or, go eat somewhere and I'll help you. I'll wash your dishes. There are little things that our families and relatives do for us that really contribute the way in which we stay strong and stay healthy and be the kind of parents that we want to be.
Exactly. All right. So you're going through college now with a young toddler. And so how did you transition from nursing to leadership? Can you take us through that?
Yeah. So there's a story there. When I graduated from nursing school, I really thought I was going to be a bedside nurse. And that was the only dream I had. I never really thought of anything else, because the people that inspired me to become a nurse were doing that, and they were great at it, and they were, doing some miraculous work. But my first job was at a county hospital. And this is in 2000 when I graduated, and we had very few social workers in the hospital. And I ended up working in the unit that had all the end-stage kidney disease patients and end-stage heart disease patients. So, we have people on pacemakers, and we just had open heart surgery, and people who are on dialysis. And about 30% of our patients were ending up on the streets as homeless people. So I would admit patients and send them home on a Friday. They'll just come back on Monday. And we had this thing called, discharge to self-care, which really meant discharge them to the streets. And I really ate me up because here I was coming from a refugee camp just a few years before that, coming to the richest country on earth, what I felt like, with all the wealth and opportunities and resources. And, I'm sending people to the streets to die. That didn't really sit well with me. And I remember talking to my nurse manager, who was from Philippines. And I would just end up in her room and we would just have these conversations. And about my second year there, she looked at me one day, it was right after Thanksgiving, and she just said, Sahra, you're asking really, really important questions about policy and systems and, the sociology of how people really end up in this kind of situation and how they can be better. But that's not, when you're a bedside nurse, we can't be asking that kind of questions. Our job is to just do the job, send him or her home. We don't have the opportunities to engage in those conversations. But it sounds like that's what you're really passionate about. Why don't you think about becoming a public health nurse and, doing policy work and we're really getting out of the hospital environment? And she was someone that I trusted. And other people, they're always like, oh, did that discourage you? Or did you get angry? And I really didn't get angry. I think the light bulbs went off and I was like, okay, I think she's onto something. I have no idea how to do what she's asking me to do. But basically, she's telling me, I can't help you. I can't help our patients. I'm having the same frustrations as you have, but you seem to have passion for fixing it. So go fix it and fix it outside of the hospital. So I got a job I talked to some people and I ended up getting a job at a community health center and became an educator. So basically got the community health nursing job that she wanted me to have.
Mm-hmm.
But then I still kept talking because even in the community health center, people come in who are uninsured, they have the same issues. I just have more time to talk about those things. And there's an environment space for those kind of conversations in the community, unlike, in a hospital setting where you just have to turn the beds and, the pace is much faster.
Yeah, deal with the acute issues and, everything else, take it outside, basically.
Exactly. So then I started looking at graduate schools and then was coached into considering leadership because while I was at the community health, I kept getting promoted to supervisor and then to assistant manager. And then my boss would just say, Sahra, we really need minority nurses in leadership roles. You just have some really good skills for this. Instead of getting a master's in public health, why don't you get master's in nursing administration or business administration or some leadership skill? And that's how I ended up. I went back and got my master's in health systems administration. And I did an interdisciplinary MS, which really allowed me to take a lot of courses in policy, public health, and business. So just kind of understanding the business of healthcare that sometimes cause the problems that we complain about, which is the insurance system and,
right,
lack of resources for social services and community services and things like that. And then as soon as I graduated, I ended up getting a job at United Health Group, which is a large insurance company in the States. And I think they have an international presence. I became a director there, doing work with Medicaid populations, the low-income patients who had multiple chronic health problems. Worked in multiple states, worked in Texas, and that's where we used to see each other.
Right.
In Hawaii, and spent some time in New York, Boston. I mean, I got to see really how dysfunctional the system is no matter what state you're in. Some states are better than others, but there are those issues. And when then I got sick of all the travel and just got a job at the hospital at the University of Minnesota Medical Center as hospital administrator, another director role close to home, and did that for about 6 years. And then I was approached to see if I would consider applying for the CEO job for this network of community health centers in Minneapolis that served a lot of Somali population, but have never really had CEO of color. So I was the third CEO and did that for about 4 years.
You were approached to come, you didn't seek this. You were approached because of your experience and, your work and what you've done to become a CEO of a system, right? And all this started because you questioned the system.
Yes, right? I questioned the system.
Right. And
I think the reason I was approached, the person who was recruiting happened to be a former president of the foundation at the hospital that I was working in. So he and I had a relationship, collegial relationship because we worked together. He had left a few years earlier and became an executive recruiter for a consulting company. So I think what he remembered, when I asked him why me, is he said, I always consider you as a catalyst for change. I never considered you as just a generic administrator or a leader, that you were putting yourself in positions where you could actually make a difference, or where you can question, but also act on those questions.
Right.
And that's, I think, what that institution at that time needed.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's what a lot of institutions need. One of the things that I always run into is there are systems in place that right now don't work very well, right? Whether it's within our society, within our communities. And, I usually look at it from the perspective of, based on this podcast, is why is it so hard for professional Muslim women to advance or to get into, certain fields? And realizing that the things that, I personally went through and the stories that I hear is that there are systems in place that just don't work, right? And how do you go about changing it? And I really, I think your story demonstrates it so well, is you found things that weren't working or that were working poorly, and you started questioning the system, right? And instead of, you had a really good mentor who, instead of like turning you away and saying, hey, you're a nurse, just do your job, she said, she empowered you to really pursue those questions and work on the changes that needed to happen, right?
Yeah. And I think the other piece I would say that, we can't predict. People ask me if I always wanted to have these kind of roles, because when you look at it on a piece of paper, it's not linear. It doesn't really quite make sense, right? People start sometimes in a hospital and their trajectory is that they move up all the way to the CEO. or they start an insurance company and their goal is to get to the top, or they're at a community center. People have this lifelong goals and ambitions of, I want to get from where I am to the top, right?
Right.
And I've never really had that. My thing has always been, I'm really passionate about how do we serve the most underserved people creatively, equitably, and affordably.
Right.
So, I hate bureaucracy. I don't really care for the titles as much, because that, to me, there are people who have titles and have zero power to make any difference.
Yep.
So I always felt like if I need to move sideways sometimes to keep doing work that I'm really passionate about and work that gives me purpose, that's how I see my role in leadership. And I've had barriers, but I really didn't let it get to me, because I was like, okay, as long as these can maneuver and use the politics of that particular position to advance my mission, I will not let the racism and the sexism that's so pervasive and institutional racism, which is, which is really powerful.
Oh, yeah.
I won't let it get to me, but I will try to do my best to work well under those conditions. And when the time is for me to move on, I will move on. I will not fight it. That's, I think, where the burnout comes from.
Yeah.
Frustration.
Yeah, but even
because we try to fight it.
Yeah. So I think, what we were just talking about questioning the system, I think that in itself can be used not only to question institutional racism and, things that may not be thought of as institutional racism, but are to correct them, right? I remember the experience that I had was my first time I came to the operating room as a medical student. They've never had someone who wore a hijab in the operating room, right? And I was orienting with a group of students, and this nurse comes in and starts yelling at me to say, hey, you're not allowed to be here. And then my entire group just moves on and does their thing. And I'm sitting here left to deal with this. And I'm like, no, I'm supposed to be here. You tell me what needs to happen for me to, continue going. And it turns out they had no idea what to do. Right. And so I said, as clean as the cloth caps that you guys take in and out of the operating room, and my hair is more covered than anybody else. So I'm like, you're either going to change your policy, or you're going to have to create a new policy that says hijabs are okay. I can wear a hat or whatever it is you want, but I'm going in the operating room, right?
You can't stop me.
You can't stop me. So I think it's important to question, some of the systemic, that's a, systemic racism thing, but they've never dealt with it. And it's never been a problem because nobody has ever questioned it. Nobody has ever pushed against it. Right. And so I think that's one of the most important things. I think you're right. We get offended and we fight it and we get angry. But I think the Socratic method of questioning it, of why not? Why are we not allowed to do that? Why is this not supposed to happen? And having a solution, right? Sadly, as an underrepresented minorities and people of color, we do have to come up with the solutions ourselves in order for us to make, a position for ourselves in places that aren't very accepting.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing I would say is, when you get that kind of a reaction of you can't do something, doing what you just did so well. So say, why not?
Right. Right.
What is the difference between my hijab and your cap?
Exactly.
I think people get so worked up, and sometimes we freeze and we get angry and we get emotional because it is so unfair. It is so humiliating. It is so upsetting that it takes a lot of courage to push back. And we have the scars to show for it. Yeah. But that's the only way to survive in that kind of environment.
You're right. And that's one of the things that I think I'm really excited about, having this platform to be able to discuss those things and kind of prep people, who may be going into those situations, to say there are multiple ways of dealing with it. And if you're prepared, I think you handle the situation a little bit better. Right?
Absolutely.
I think one of the problems that I had in dealing with a lot of the things that I've gone through is, there's no preparation, except for the fact that, hey, you're going to get a lot of, pushback. So it was just an expectation. But I think preparing people with, these are the different ways to handle it. So when you're mentally prepared, I think your reaction might be a little bit better. It's still shocking. It's still hurtful. But I think having that conversation to say, yes, it happens everywhere, right? Yeah. It happens across the board. And I've talked to engineers, I've talked to lawyers, I've talked to, a lot of people, and the stories are the same regardless of what field, right?
Yeah. And the other thing I think that makes things complicated is I had these conversations with some colleagues who are African American, and when they would go home and they would tell their parents or they would tell their grandparents, and the system could help them cope with it, right?
Yep.
We don't have that. So I remember one time I was so frustrated. This is when I was at United Health Group with this medical director in Dallas who would just say, really racist things to me. He kept saying I couldn't be Black, and I had to have some other blood in me, or maybe I was Native American. And he would do it in meetings, and it had nothing to do with really being curious about my ethnicity. It was just to signal that I didn't belong there and to make me so uncomfortable that I wouldn't lead that meeting with good mental health,
Yeah.
And I remember coming in one time and visiting my grandfather, who was really, who was close to me. And he's like, oh, like, my daughter, I haven't seen you for a long time. And he's like, here's a cup of coffee. And I take coffee and I say, Grandpa, this is what's happening. And he's like, I'm really sorry, but maybe you're too young for the leadership job. It's like, maybe you need to quit, because if you were older, you wouldn't get this worked up. If you were older and you're more mature, you would just smile at him, because that's his problem. Why do you care? Because even though he grew up in colonial Somalia, he had so much pride. And he just thought everybody should just roll with it. That nothing that someone else said should really ruin your day, Yeah. He's kind of that kind of old school toughen up,
Yep.
And saying that it's the age thing. It's, I'm not mature enough to handle those situations, where if my colleague who was 30 went to their African American, or second generation immigrant parents, that's not the kind of conversation they would have.
Right.
They would say, here's what you need to do.
Right.
And we don't have that. Our parents either shut down, tell us, to go get a different job, or they just say, toughen up. And that doesn't really help.
It doesn't help. And that's one of the things that I think is so crucial for us to talk about is, taking it and just, toughening up is not an option. Leaving something that you're passionate about in a position that you deserved and worked hard for is not an option. So, so what's the option, right? And I'm hoping, we can get to a point where, collating all these different experiences and learning from women who overcame them, who dealt with them constructively, who rose through the ranks and still maintained, their authenticity, their sanity, can, give us, little bits and clues of how, like a listener who's hearing these stories can say, oh, if I'm ever in that situation, I have this potential option, this other person did it this way. They have multiple options of how to deal with it and how to overcome it and deal with it, rather than just walking away or just accepting it and being, subject to that kind of treatment.
Right. Yeah. True. We need that.
Yeah. That's wonderful. So how did you transition from being a CEO in Minnesota to running a consulting agency and being a health executive in Nairobi?
So we all feel like we want to go back, but it never happens, right?
Right.
If you asked me a couple of years ago, I would not have thought here's where I would be. The short story is my husband has some roots in Kenya and got a really great opportunity to work in Nairobi. So that's how we originally moved here. We've been talking about it for about 3 years and finally decided to bring our family together and to have the kids grow up with their grandparents and their dad's side of the family. So that's the personal side of it. But the professional side, when I was in grad school, I did my master's research in Somalia. I've traveled back and forth in the region over the years since I left grad school. And I've always wanted to give back in some ways to what's happening in Somalia, what's happening in the Horn of Africa and just East Africa in general. And, after 20 years of just being on that 9-to-5 grind, I didn't want to look for just another job. I wanted to find a way to leverage all the skills and experiences I had to help Somalia and my people, but also to do some work in Kenya and other countries. And the best way I felt I could do while still be a mom and learn as much as I could is through consulting. I felt there's still a lot I need to learn, and kind of dipping my toe in a few things would really expose me to all the different aspects of the healthcare system in a fragile and conflict or post-conflict setting. And so my consulting really focuses on strengthening health systems, training the workforce to improve performance of whatever health system that exists. There's a significant private sector healthcare in Somalia and in the region. And then there's also the public, and then there's also the donor-funded projects. Mm-hmm. So I dabble into all of those things, and it has been fun, and I've learned a lot. And I don't know how much I am helping. It feels like it's quite humbling because people here do amazing work in one of the most challenging circumstances.
Wow. So you travel back and forth between Somalia and Kenya?
Yes, I do.
And so you said the different organizations that you work with are both the private hospitals. Are there any government-run hospitals?
There are government-run hospitals, but there are, small numbers in comparison to all these privately owned enterprises that entrepreneurs have set up in all parts of Somalia and Somaliland. And wherever you go, you see, I think the majority of healthcare is run by the private sector, whether it's an NGO run or private, like a business owner. Mm-hmm. And then there are very few hospitals and clinics that run by the government, regional government or the federal.
And do you do more work in Kenya or Somalia?
I do more work in Somalia than Kenya.
Wonderful. All right. So how are you liking that? Is it more challenging than working as a CEO in a health system in America?
Both have their own unique challenges and opportunities. I think here for me, the biggest challenge is the lack of trained workforce because, during the 30-year civil war, all of our institutions have been dismantled. Mm-hmm. And it's easier to destroy things than it is to rebuild. Mm-hmm. It's being rebuilt. And the biggest concern I have is it being rebuilt for the future, or is it being rebuilt to maintain the status quo and things that we've had, or things that we currently want to have? And a lot of my work, at least with the donor side of things, is really to help them to see that the needs of Somali population is going to be completely different 30 years down the road.
Right.
And we need to build more innovative health system and processes and operations that can really be sustained 30, 50 years down the road.
Right. This is one of the reasons how we met, right?
Yes.
So I think I was a medical student. I was a third-year medical student, if I remember correctly. And we founded this group called PUSH, Peers United for Somali Health. And it was myself and a few other healthcare students. And Sahra was, I think you were one of the more experienced people that we had to look up to. I think you were in graduate school at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Basically, we're trying to figure out how, as diaspora, we could give back to help support the healthcare system in Somalia. It's very difficult. It's a humbling experience to know that, there's a huge problem that obviously does not have an easy fix. And requires, something like you're doing, something more innovative and more on the ground, hands-on work.
For me, you and I know the system we grew up in, quote unquote, in the United States is not perfect, right? It's one of the most flawed systems that we've had. So the humbling part is, we're not coming with great wisdom. Mm-hmm. And I'm very honest with people about that we come from a very wealthy system, that's for sure. And that is really good at trauma, and that's really good at fixing, surgery and, those kind of things. But it's not really good at keeping people healthy.
Right.
And in the fragile and post-conflict countries, the priority is really not to do surgeries. The priority is to, have women giving birth alive, having children survive beyond the age of 5.
Yep.
Preventing non-communicable diseases, immunizations. I mean, they have
basic healthcare infrastructure
that we're not good at in the US. But for me, having studied in health systems and how to run health systems, then having had the opportunity to run a primary care system, I feel like at least I know what needs to get done. Mm-hmm. The challenge then becomes do we have the basic pillars, right? To run even the primary health system, you have to have people who are well-trained. You have to have the right equipment. You have to have the right hospital, facilities designed for that. Sometimes that's the challenge. So, for example, one of the things that I always fight or have big issue with is a lot of the way things are designed with the development and the donor mindset, right? People who say, this is what is sexy. This is what we will fund today. And in the States, for example, we moved from women-only centers to family centers because people realize that children need parents and grandparents, and taking care of the whole family is better than taking care of just the women because she's not alone, right? Mm-hmm. But that's not how international development works. A lot of money just goes to women and children's health.
Right.
So the men are just kind of not expected, maybe, to be healthy or I don't know what. And then, there's a TB center, a different place. And then there is a HIV clinic, different. And mental health is separate. So it really stigmatizes people from thinking about holistic healthcare.
Yep.
Because if you see me go into a women's clinic, you already assume I'm pregnant, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you see me go into HIV clinic, you already know what I have.
Right.
If you see me in TB, so why would I go?
Right. Yeah. And I think that's the important thing of having someone with, your experience there, giving that perspective, because a lot of people say, we're developing an entire system just to take care of this without taking into account if the people having to go into that place and having to feel that.
Right. The cultural piece is that we cannot change in a vacuum.
Right.
I mean, I wish I could change the stigma around mental illness or HIV or TB, but that's going to take a lifetime for that to change.
Right.
But what we can change is the way in which we design our health system so that if I go into a building, people have no clue what I'm getting. So they know that I'm getting healthcare, but I'm not announcing.
Right. I mean, it's kind of like HIPAA here, right? It's like, hey, by the way,
That's the kind of stuff that I know from the States and that we were good at.
Yep.
And that's the only thing I offer is in some ways is to say there is a way to at least design it in a way that's culturally competent.
Right.
Because the men in our culture, whether we like it or not, still make decisions. There are heartbreaking stories of women dying because the husband refuses the C-section, father denying the child the kind of surgery or healthcare they need. So we're in a patriarchal society.
Yeah.
And when you marginalize men, you don't really get the kind of outcomes that you need.
Yep.
To the extent that we can keep, I'm not going to say keep the patriarchy intact because there are people who would argue that's not healthy either. But my point is let the people who need to fight the patriarchy fight. But those of us in healthcare, we have to deal with reality.
Yep.
And we cannot let our activism get in the way of providing good care. To the extent that we can use culture to facilitate better care, we use it. And it doesn't cost us that much.
Yeah, and a lot of it just comes down to basic education, right? I've had a lot of talks with, people in our community who say, they don't need that kind of surgery. And when you explain what the surgery is and why it's important and what the long-term outcome is going to be, you realize it's just basic communication, right? Nobody has defined to them why it's necessary. And it's not just, within the Somali community. It happens in a lot of other communities where when people don't understand, they make decisions that are not in their best interest. I'm really happy that you're there working, on that front and bringing in that perspective. And
thank you.
Yeah, and I'll be following your work. Inshallah, hopefully we'll see the fruits of your labor.
Thank you.
You and I can chit chat all day long, but we're coming to the end, and I usually ask a set number of questions at the end. And one of the questions is, what is the biggest obstacle that you've had to overcome in your journey?
People underestimating me. I joke that I'm a middle child. Always that, the older siblings telling you you're not, really that smart. And then the younger ones telling you you should know better. So it's like growing up, that was always something that I felt like I was always exceeding people's expectations. And then when you grow up professionally in a country like the United States with all of its opportunities, and I'm very grateful for all I've gotten in the 20-some years that I've lived there, it's just having people, always thinking you can't do something and then trying to prove them wrong.
Right.
And that takes a toll. So that I would say throughout my career, I've had people just being wowed when I did the basic things just because, and I'm sure you have stories about the same thing where you're like, this is not that big of a deal. I don't need you to get too excited about this. It says more about you than me.
Exactly.
You think I couldn't do this. And older I got, actually, I was more amused and less upset because it really is dynamic that we just have to experience, and we have to just not let it get to us because, every job I've had, think I couldn't do it or be really excited when I had the basic competency that they thought, I needed to have for that particular job.
Oh, man. Oh, the stories I can tell you. Oh, yes. That's awesome. Okay, so on that note, what would you tell your younger self? Like today, knowing where you are today and all that you've accomplished, what would you tell your younger self, and what would you tell young women listening to you right now in, given the experience that you've had?
This might sound really simple, but I would say stay focused. I remember in my 20s, I was so worried and so caught up in all sorts of different dramas that happened, I think, in about teen years, but I'm like my 20s, I'd never want to go back to it. It's you have so many people telling you what you need to do and what you should do and what you shouldn't do. And you get so distracted by all of that. And by the grace of God that I had my father and my grandfather and my aunts and uncles who were to say, you're on the right path, stay on it. But I could have gone in multiple directions because everybody thought I should do something that they thought was more exciting for me to be doing, whether it is just staying at home and being a wife and a mom, or whether it was doing something completely different or owning a business. I think I would tell my young self, stay focused.
That's great advice.
Yeah. If you stay focused on doing the right thing, you never know where life will lead you. You don't really need to figure out everything.
Yeah. You may go back to Kenya and travel to Somalia frequently.
In 10 years, I may be living in Somalia, and I never, ever come back to Africa or Somalia or anywhere in my lifetime when I left as a refugee.
That's amazing. I still can't see it. I think about it once in a while. I'm like, I still don't see it.
You never know.
You never know. That's true. You never know. Well, that was a very enlightening conversation. Thank you so much, Sahra, for being with us today and sharing your story. I'm hoping, inshallah, later on when we talk about specific topics that you may be an expert in, we can have you come back for another conversation. Is there any last piece of advice or anything that you want to leave with our listeners today?
No, but you have been a great friend and a sister to me. So I'm really grateful for all of our years of friendship, having to laugh about some of the things that we went through. And I'm very excited about this podcast and the impact you'll have on a lot of people, both from our community and other Muslims around the world. So congratulations again. And thanks for having me. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you so much. Thank you for tuning into the Professional Muslim Women Podcast, the place for Muslim women to inspire and be inspired.
Please join us on our Facebook group, Professional Muslim Women, to continue the conversation and connect with Muslim women like you. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and drop us a like or a review.
We look forward to hearing from you soon.